Okay, so we shall get started for this morning. Okay, my name is Matt Clark and I'm the Partnership and Events Manager for the Hertfordshire Growth Hub. The Hertfordshire Growth Hub is led and delivered on behalf of the Local Enterprise Partnership. We are one of 38 growth hubs across the UK, and we're delivered by a consortium of partners led by support specialists, Exemplas, the University of Hertfordshire, the Hertfordshire Chamber of Commerce, and Visit Hearts. Our support is fully funded, it's impartial, and it's free for you. There's no catches. It's available for all sizes of SME, regardless of size or stage of business. In terms of the support that we offer, it's all in one place, and that's the Hertfordshire Growth Hub. We look at planning and vision, we look at sales and marketing, we look at sales sustainability, resilience and risk, skills and recruitment, workplace well-being, regulation and compliance, and advice on funding and finance. How we sort of offer our advice is through one-to-one support, is through events like today, is through on-demand videos. We have a great tool called Grant Finder, and we have access to great resources across the ecosystem. If we're looking for in-depth advice, we have a dedicated growth account manager to carry out an in-depth analysis on your organisation and provide ongoing support. There's professional advice to develop a bespoke plan of action and overcome barriers to growth and identify opportunities. And we manage referrals to additional providers where required, using again our contacts within the ecosystem. It's quite easy to get in touch with us. Many of you have our contact details because you're on the webinar today, but there's some contact details there. There's a phone number, there's an email address, and more importantly, there's our website. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand over to David Hatmil from Tender Assist, and he's going to talk you through an introduction to public sector tendering. So if you just give me a second, I will change presenters and I shall hand over to David. If you accept that, David.
Yeah, is that okay?
Excellent. There you go. I'm going to go on mute and I'm going to hand over to David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm David. My business, as you can see at the bottom, is Tender Assist, and the purpose of today's webinar is, as you can see, an introduction to public sector tendering. So the objective is at the end of this, you'll understand what public sector tendering is, how you can get involved, and it will give you then the hopefully the impetus to decide whether it's something for you or not. So let's get cracking. So what is public sector tendering? The process whereby businesses can sell their goods and services to public sector organisations by bidding for contracts. So public sector organisations include local authorities and councils, National Health Service, educational establishments, housing associations, Ministry of Defence and government departments, charities, blue light organisations, and major infrastructure. So examples there: London 2012, Crossrail, Lower Thames Crossing, and I guess what's left of HS2 now. What services and products does the public sector procure? Is a very easy answer to that question, and that is everything. So to put that into perspective, if you take the National Health Service, technically speaking, every single product and service that the NHS procures is a public sector tender. So that could be somebody to fix and maintain the photocopy machines, could be security, cleaning attendants, or it could be a £10 million piece of kit for an operating theatre. They all come under public sector tenders. So the key component parts to bidding for a public sector contract are: contract notice is published, selection questionnaire is issued, you're then invited to tender. Sometimes you're required to deliver a presentation, that's obviously further on in the process, and then eventually the contract is awarded. And I always say at this point when I'm, talking to potential clients or people that are interested in, you need to understand that the way our public sector works, it's not quick win. It is a very slow, deliberate, protracted service and process. So the typical time duration to get from 1.1 to 0.5, i.e. contract notice published and contract awarded, is anything between 2 and 6 months. So as I say, it's not quick win. You have to be in it for the long haul. So let's have a look at some of these in a little bit more detail. So the contract notice, that's published daily on a myriad of websites, and they're all free. Anybody can go on them daily to get them. The government has a main tender portal called Find a Tender, but there's loads of others. So we're based in Hertfordshire, and there is one called Supply Hearts. And basically how that works is when the contracting authority decides they've got a tender they want to put out, normally that process is managed by procurement. Procurement then collate all the information. They then send it out as a contract notice through the Find a Tender and any other local portals that they want to use. So in terms of the information that's on the contract notice, it's the name of the organisation, the services, products required, the contract duration, the tender submission date. Sometimes they even give the contract value, and then there's a link to another portal. So on day one, when you look at the contract notice, I always say that's a warm lead because you're getting all that information that's there on screen facing you on day one. So you know who it is, what they want, when it starts, when it finishes, how much it costs, then there's a link to another portal. So the link to the other portal is one where all the tender documentation is held. So the idea is you click on that link in the contract notice, and you're required then to register on one of these other portals. There's no cost to this, doesn't take long. They just basically want your name and your company details. You will then get sent pretty much immediately an email with a username and password. You then get back into that portal, and from that point on, that is the portal you use for your process for bidding for that tender. So if we have a look now at the tender documentation, so there'll always be a specification and scope document, and that's very important at the beginning, because although the contract notice would have hopefully, got you interested in a tender, and you look at it and think, yeah, that looks interesting, something that we do, and I'd like to bid for it, that in no way gives you enough information as to what you need as to whether you actually want to bid for it. So the first document you would look for once you download the tender documents from the portal with your username and password would be the specification and scope document, and that'll give you a lot more information on the actual tender, so you can start to formulate a decision of whether you want to bid for it or not. Then there'll be a pricing schedule, and the best way to describe the pricing schedule is normally an Excel spreadsheet, not exclusively, but normally an Excel spreadsheet. And the way I describe it to prospective clients and people I'm talking to is however you normally price up your goods and services, the contracting authority will have put together a pricing schedule that mirrors that format. So when you open the pricing schedule to look at it, it should be familiar to you because that's the way you would normally price up your goods and services. There's then a selection questionnaire, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. There's then an invitation to tender, and again, I'll come back to that. And then there's various contractual documents. So all these documents for the supplier who ultimately wins the tender, all these documents form part of the contract along with terms and conditions and various other things. So various contractual documents will be things like form of tender, anti-canvassing, freedom of information, and those documents, they require signatures, dates, addresses, etc. But they all collate ultimately for the supplier who wins as part of the actual contract you then sign with the contracting authority. So let's have a look at a couple of documents in a little bit more detail. So the selection questionnaire The selection questionnaire asks one simple question, and that is, tell me about your business. So it's a document that's about 30 to 40 pages long, so it's quite a weighty tome. Mostly it's done as a Word document. Sometimes it's an actual on-screen document where you type your answers in. And the objective of the selection questionnaire is to provide the contracting authority with a level of comfort about your business. So the key sections of the selection questionnaire are as follows. So in other words, the selection questionnaire is basically saying, tell me all about you and your business. So it's a risk assessing document for the contracting authority. So they want to know your organization details, qualification assessment, economic and financial, quality assurance, health and safety, equality and diversity, and what environmental activity you're up to, what company policies you've got, capabilities, references, and supplier declarations. And the supplier declaration is basically giving your contact details. So as you can see from that, it's quite a detailed document, but as I say, the best way to understand it is it's saying, tell me all about you and your business. So that's a key document that's required to be completed. The invitation to tender, that asks another pretty straightforward question actually, and that is, if we award you this contract, how will you set it up, how will you deliver it, and how much will your services and products cost? So where the selection questionnaire basically said, tell me all about you and your business, and it wants to know information about your company so that procurement can do a risk assessment. Are you big enough? Are you, solvent enough, etc., etc. The invitation to tender, it asks all the technical quality questions. And the key sections of that are as follows. There's a procurement timeline. There's a scope of works that will give a little bit more detail on the actual work, services and products required. They'll want to know about your health and safety, if you've got health and safety policy, etc. Tender evaluation, which I'll come back to in a second because that revolves around the technical quality questions. Financial requirements, payment procedures. So they'll tell you about how they're going to pay you, and again I'll come back to that a bit later on. There'll be terms and conditions documents, supplier pricing schedule, which we spoke about earlier. That'll be the spreadsheet, and then these again are examples of the additional forms: collusive tendering form, form of tender, supplier declaration. And the invitation to tender will also give you the submission procedures. So the submission procedures, normally they give about a calendar month to complete these documents, and then you would upload them to the portal where you've got your username and password by a very definitive deadline time and date. So they will say, complete all the documents that we want you to complete, upload them to the portal and submit them by no later than midday, and it's normally midday on the 15th of October. And the key thing to remember about that is you are uploading these documents to an electronic system. So quite simply, 1 second past midday on the 15th of October, that system will automatically shut down. And if you haven't got all your stuff uploaded by then you're out. There's no point getting onto contracting authority, say, oh, loads of people were trying to get on this morning, I couldn't get on. They're not interested because they'll say, we've given you up to 30 days to complete this, and that's something that you need to be able to manage your time. So that's something you just need to be very much aware of. And then the bit at the bottom there, social value, that's something that's come into public sector tendering in quite a big way, really, in the last couple of years. So the interpretation of social value to contracting authorities is basically around, if we award you this contract, what else can you as a business do to help and support the area where the tender is? So there, I've given a couple of examples of the sorts of thing they look for: sponsorship, local employment. So for example, if to deliver this tender, you'll need to take on some more staff. it'll be very good for you and them if you can employ those staff in the area where you're delivering the tender. Apprentices, as we all know, the government is really big on apprentices, so local authorities and public sector organisations have just embraced that. So, you know, if you have apprentices within your business, even though that might not necessarily be in the area where you're going to be delivering the tender, that's still a major plus, because it actually makes the contracting authority look good, because they'll be able to go back to central government and say, yeah, we are using suppliers in our supply chain that embrace social value. So social values are very important. So moving on from that, there is the option for contracting authorities at this stage, once the tender documents have been submitted, for them to hold presentations. So they don't do that on every occasion. And when you go through the tender documents, once you've downloaded them, it will state in there at that early stage if presentations are part of the process. So the question is, why does the contracting authority engage in presentation interviews? And again, the answer is very simple. It goes way back to the origins of sales, and that is that people buy from people. So if you think about it, we backtrack to contract notice was published, we're interested in it, we registered on the portal, we've got all the documents, we've gone through the documents, we want to bid for it, we express the interest, we start filling out the documents, etc. Throughout that process, you're not talking to anybody. And in fact, procurement are not actually allowed to engage in one-to-one conversations with bidders who are bidding for tenders. There is a messaging capability within the portal that you've got your username and password. So if you do have questions or you do have issues about the tender, you can message procurement and they will respond to you. But what you're not allowed to do is pick a phone up and talk to them, on the phone or face to face. They're not allowed to do that. So sometimes from the contracting authority's point of view, it's helpful to them to then get the shortlisted suppliers once they've decided on that list and actually get them in for a presentation. So nothing particularly unusual or special about a presentation within the world of public sector. It's usually, we've all done a million presentations, I'm sure. So you get your opportunity to give an overview of the business. Sometimes they will have asked you to speak about perhaps 2 or 3 specific elements of the tender, so you'll discuss that. Then the panel will have questions for you. And I suppose the only subtle difference is in having spoken to a number of procurement managers over the years, they actually like it when suppliers who attend presentations have good quality questions for the panel, because it just makes the panel feel a little bit more comfortable that the supplier really understands the tender. As you can imagine, some of the tenders are quite complex, there's quite a lot going on. So if you've got some good quality questions as to how you want to deliver that tender for the panel, that's quite a plus. So then that moves on to contract award. So as I said earlier, this process can take anything between 2 and 5 or 6 months. And so under contract award, the contracting authority is required to publish details of successful bidders. So that's quite an interesting one. So in other words, what they mean by that is that as well as publishing contract notices, which basically tells you there's an opportunity up for grabs, once they award that contract, normally about a couple of months after, they publish who actually won the contract. So, and it's all, again, it's all out there in the public domain. So it is possible for you to then have a look at the contract notice just to see who won it. That's, of course, assuming you haven't won it, in which case you would know. These are published daily along with contract notices. And I said they normally publish them about a month, couple of months after they've awarded the contract and the whole contract has settled down. Information on the contract award notice is they'll give details of the contract, the contract duration, the contract value, who the successful bidder or bidders were, and the contract start date. So sometimes that could be quite interesting for suppliers who are bidding, who want, largely, if you want to know who your competition out there, who is it that's actually winning these contracts, and how can we sort of overtake them and win it for ourselves. So contract awards can be quite useful. So fine to talk about contract awards, but what's equally important is to talk about what if you are unsuccessful. And interestingly and very importantly, as part of the tendering process, contracting authorities are required, so it's not a nice to have, they are required to provide feedback as to why a bid was unsuccessful. And it's vitally important, because if you bid for a tender, as you can see, there's quite a bit of investment in time and money for you to bid for these tenders, and you don't win it, and you just get an email back from the contracting authority saying, sorry, you were unsuccessful, better luck next time. That doesn't really help you, and it doesn't really encourage you to bid for more, carry on bidding for more tenders. So feedback is absolutely vital if you are unsuccessful. And the feedback is quite comprehensive. Some of the reasons why you might not win are not answering the questions, misleading poor information, non-competitive contract pricing, scoring beneath the baseline, not enough, no experience in the business sector, insufficient turnover, poor references, and insufficient, poor level of accreditation and relevant membership. So I'll pick 2 or 3 of these and just go into a little bit more detail. So procurement will come back, and one of the things they'll look at is your responses to the technical quality questions, and they will tell you what they didn't like about them. And they'll say, your answer to question 4 was okay, but it would have been nice if you told us a bit more about X or Y. And of course, that information is important, because obviously when you bid again and that question comes up, procurement are interested in X and Y. So you'll make sure that's in your future answer. Non-competitive contract pricing. So there's a myth that goes around the public sector, they only go for the cheapest. I hear this all the time. And the way how they get around that is, yes, public sector organisations are extremely keen on price, and they're keen on price because if you think of what the organisations are, NHS, education, charities, local authorities, these are not profit-making organisations. So a lot of these organisations, they get their money from us paying taxes to the government, who then shell out billions of pounds to these organisations. So when they get their billions of pounds, they need to be very careful how they spend that money. So therefore, price is very key and keen to them. However, the way how tenders are scored is they have what's known as contract awarding criteria, and it's a percentage split principally between quality and price. So, and this information is in the tender documents once you download them. So they will say, we will be awarding this tender. So let's use an example of 60% quality, 40% price. So what that means is once they've evaluated all your technical quality responses, and it's a bit like taking an exam really, they're all scored, weighted and marked, they will end up with a total figure, i.e. the total number of marks you've got. So if the awarding criteria for quality is 60%, that mark that you get, they will multiply that by 60, put that to one side. When it comes to pricing, they'll look at, and sometimes they will have given you what the budget is, other times they won't. They're not required to do that, but quite a lot of the authorities do. So there will be a price figure that contracting authority is aware of. Let's call it 200 grand for the value of that tender. So they'll look at the shortlisted ones and look at the prices, and just to make sure those prices are around the 200 grand mark, because that's their ballpark figure. If there's one there that comes in at, say, 90 grand, procurement will challenge that supplier. They'll go back to that supplier and they'll say, okay, we see you put a bid in of 90 grand for this tender. So the supplier will say, yeah, and procurement will just casually say, well, how are you going to do that then? Because they know it's a 200 grand tender. So they will flesh out people who are trying to, come in ultra cheap and try and sort of, pull the wool over their eyes. The procurement are as talented and skillful in their job as we are in ours. So there, you're then left with the shortlisted suppliers around the 200 grand. Then what happens is they will, if the awarding criteria is 40% for pricing, they will then look at the lowest bid that's put in and multiply that figure. It's a little bit more complex than I'm describing, but in principle, this is how they do it. They will multiply that figure by 40. They'll then look at the next one down, and they'll multiply that by, say, 37.5. Then the next one by 35, and then 32.5, and they go all the way down. So what you end up with is two figures, a figure based on the calculation of the pricing criteria, and the figure based on the criteria from the 60% quality. So procurement then put those two figures together, and what is the highest figure, quite simply, that's the supplier who wins the tender. So if you think about that for a second, and I have seen this in some of the tenders I've worked for where there's been a success and the feedback has come back, the client, although they won the tender, they were perhaps first in quality, so they got top marks, but they were possibly second or even third in pricing. But once the two lots of marks were put together, they were still the highest. So that's the way how contracting authorities and procurement score tenders. So I think you'll agree it's a little bit more sophisticated than we just go for the cheapest. Having said that, I have seen tenders that come out, not very often to be fair, where the awarding criteria actually states we will be awarding this on 100% price. So on those occasions, procurement and the contracting authority are actually being upfront. They are saying this tender will go for the cheapest. But because they're telling you that upfront, you then, as the bidder, has the opportunity to think, now, price, that's not something I'm interested in. You just ignore that one. Or actually, because of what we do and how we work, we are able to put in a really keen price. So we'll still continue to bid for it. Insufficient turnover. Again, there's an equation that public sector use to determine whether you are of a sufficient size to bid for a particular tender. And the way how that works is they say that any organisation can bid for a public sector tender, providing the annual value of that contract, not the total value, the annual value of that contract is no greater than 50% of your annual turnover. So that's a standard equation they use, and because that equation exists, that helps us on the bidding side to decide whether it's a tender we can bid for, purely and simply because we'll apply that equation to our own turnover and the value of the tender we're bidding for. When it comes to references, public sector, they always ask for 3 references. And it's not quite as simple as, so references, the interpretation of references here are 3 of your clients that you can put up to procurement and a contracting authority to say these are clients of yours who can demonstrate that you do a good job for them. So you will have a number of, or hopefully all of your suppliers that you work, or your clients rather, that you work for, who would be prepared to give a reference, and they'll say, yeah, best thing since sliced bread, you're absolutely brilliant. And that's good and that's important, but there's also a relevance as well. So the referees and that you're putting up, there must be a relevance to the tender you're bidding for. So to explain that, if we're bidding for a cleaning contract, and that contract is £1 million, the value of the tender is £1 million, and we've got references, so we do a lot of cleaning, that's our job, and we put references up where the value of that contract is, say, only 50 grand or 100 grand, then there isn't really a correct relevance to that tender, because procurement look at it and say, okay, could be doing a good job, but it's that tender is only worth 100 grand. Have you got the scale and the capabilities and the ability to scale up to a tender worth £1 million? So it's, as I say, it's not just putting forward clients of yours who will, will say the right things about you in terms of a reference. There has to be that relevance as well. So those are some of the reasons why you're unsuccessful. So what if you are successful? Because hopefully that's the whole point of the exercise. So some of the key benefits from successful bidding are you won a contract for 1, 2, 3 or more years. And when you sign that contract on day one, it is yours for that period of time. Nobody's going to take it away from you. So there's a massive comfort factor. There's a capability to win more public sector contracts. So again, if we go back to the, well, if you win a contract, that's great because you've got the answers you gave to win that tender and you know they work because you won it. You've also got the feedback and you know that that will help you. And also, as you start to do more and more tenders, there's a logic that says there's only so many questions procurement can ask you about the services and products you provide. So eventually, these questions are going to start repeating themselves as you do more tenders. And you will have responses to those tenders. You'll have responses where you've got feedback which will encompass the caliber and quality of those responses. And obviously, the concept of cut and paste exists out there. You just got to be careful that you review those answers so that they're relevant to the tender you're bidding for. So there is a capability that you can go on to win more contracts, certainly once you start winning them. They're good CV material for winning private contracts. So if you're a furniture company and you happen to win a £500,000 3-year contract with to deliver furniture to the University of Cambridge, that's a great tender in its own right. And then let's assume a couple of months later, you get your dream appointment and you're sitting in front of the sales director and team for GlaxoSmithKline trying to sell your furniture wares, and you just happen to drop into that conversation. By the way, a few months ago, I won a 3-year, 500 grand contract to deliver furniture to the University of Cambridge. Trust me, that will resonate with your potential private clients. So make use of the fact you win public sector tenders and make sure you let your private potential clients know that as well, because that will be a massive help. Probably the best bit about winning public sector contracts, and touched on it earlier, excuse me, public sector organisations are required, so this is not a nice to have, they are required to pay their suppliers monthly. So quite simply, if you win a 3-year contract to deliver services and products, and that contract is worth 200 grand, every 30 days for 3 years, a chunk of 200 grand will come into your account. Normally it's done on monthly in arrears, and that information is actually in the invitation to tender document. So they have to publish that. So it's not just a case of they are required to pay, they have to publish that in the document, so that you know that you're getting that money. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the presentation. So hopefully you've enjoyed it.